Hello, and thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Megan Wilson, and I'm a board member with Global Cleveland. I'm also the Chief of Staff at the Cleveland Foundation. Welcome to The Stories We Tell, the Impact of Lived Experiences on Journalism, a Global Cleveland Welcoming Week panel discussion. First, I would like to acknowledge and say a special thank you to each of our Welcoming Week sponsors, the Platinum sponsors, Cleveland Cavaliers, Marcus Thomas, United Church of Christ, the gold sponsors, Bank of America, Dealer Tire, Cantonese Classic Seafood, the silver sponsors, Alexander Man Solutions, Cleveland Metropolitan Bar Association, Eli's Landscaping, Medical Mutual, the NRP Group, and the bronze sponsors, the City of Cleveland, Cuyahoga County, City Visitor Guide, Dave's Markets, Destination Cleveland, Downtown Cleveland Alliance, Legal Aid Society of Cleveland, Margaret Wong and Associates, and WKYC Studios. We appreciate their support to bring you this week's Welcoming Week programming, and we appreciate your support of Welcoming Week. Thank you for choosing to share your morning with us. We have a wonderful panel discussion planned. Now, it's my immense pleasure to introduce you to the outstanding professionals who are our panelists today. First, our moderator, Elise James-Decruise, Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer with Marcus Thomas, a leader in digital strategy and technology. Elise is an award-winning global learning and development professional and diversity and inclusion practitioner. She was recognized by Chief Learning Officer Magazine for strategy and innovation for the launch of NMI, the New Marketing Institute, the recipient of awards recognizing excellence in education, and she was featured in Forbes magazine as one of the top females leaders to watch in the technology space. Our panelists today are all Northeast Ohio journalists who believe in fair and equitable reporting when it comes to covering the news. Amani Abraham with WKYC Studios is an Emmy Award-winning journalist. She was born and raised in the Akron area and holds a passion for sharing stories and opening opportunities to make a difference in her hometown. Homa is a reporter and journalist with WEWS. She was born in India, raised in Oklahoma, and is now a diehard Clevelander. Maia Belay is an award-winning reporter for Fox 8 News. She comes from a unique cultural background of both African American and Ethiopian experiences. Janet Cho is a freelance business journalist and a 2020 Knight Wallace Journalism Fellow at the University of Michigan. She previously reported for The Plain Dealer, where her stories about the failed retailer Inkstop helped 629 workers recover $660,000 in owed wages. Sia Nyorkor is an anchor and reporter at Channel 19, where she worked for the last 5 years. She's also a regional director for the Association of Black Journalists and identifies as a proud child of immigrants who hailed from Liberia in West Africa. I'm pleased to extend a warm welcome to our moderator and panelists today. Ladies.
Thank you so much, Megan, for the warm introduction. I'm really excited to be here today with such a distinguished group of female accomplished journalists, and looking forward to having an amazing conversation and getting people involved and advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion. So thank you again on behalf of myself and Marcus Thomas today. So let's get started. Is everyone ready? All right, so let's go ahead with our first question, and we'll open it up to all of the panelists. For the guests that are joining us this morning, we will have time for Q&A. If you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. We'd love to continue the conversation. So the first question, what are specific examples of how your immigrant heritage helps you report the news? We can start with Sia. If it works.
That's okay. Okay, yeah, I'll go first.
Okay, thank you.
Oh my gosh, yeah. So as you mentioned in your intro, I am a proud child of immigrants. So that makes me first generation. So the lens with which I see things and with the way I walk through life is a little bit different. I always say I feel like I have the best of both worlds because I was raised in a traditional West African household, as traditional can be in Indianapolis, Indiana, in the Midwest. And so I always take that approach. I always speak up. I'm never afraid to let people know, where I come from, my background. I think that it gives me a leg up in some of these stories when I go out in the community and I have to report and I tell people, I'm very honest with them. I tell them and say, I was born here, but, my parents are from Liberia and West Africa. And instantly, a lot of the times there's a click, like, that, oh, she's going to understand where I'm coming from. I'm going to feel a little more comfortable. We have a shared experience, if you will. So, they're just small examples. I just sometimes feel like I'm able to relate with people a little bit better. In that I share that experience and I tell them up front. So.
Yeah, thank you. And one area I want to touch on that you mentioned. So if there are any aspiring journalists that might need some guidance, if you will, on how to speak up, right? You mentioned your family dynamics. What are some of the ways that you think aspiring journalists can speak up and kind of hone those skills? Because I think that's a really important part of journalism and personal and professional development as a whole.
I think a lot of it comes just with being confident in yourself as a first step. I know sometimes that's difficult to do when you might be the only minority in the room or the only person of an immigrant background, but sort of what Sia was saying, being confident in yourself to say, hey, maybe we should look at this issue from a different perspective, or just being vocal in how you see the world and sharing that with your colleagues.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you. And as a female journalist, how does reporting the news impact your coverage? Or does it, or maybe it doesn't? Any thoughts or experiences specific to that?
I think we're all general assignment local news reporters, which means we cover everything, we cover anything, we cover everyone. We are everywhere at all times. And, Northeast Ohio and the country, it's just such a diverse place. So we are in all of those spaces. I think part of what, being women of color, being women of color, being immigrants, different religions, we're chameleons. So we can adapt wherever we go. You drop us into whatever neighborhood and we have the life experiences to adapt immediately. You know what I mean? So I think that really helps in our reporting. That helps in our storytelling. That helps in our sourcing, because we're always able to just fit in because we're so used to usually not fitting in.
Yeah, you raise a good point, and I love the metaphor of a chameleon, and the ability to meet people where they are, in this field and outside of this field is really important. What are some of the ways that you connect with people in your news coverage? And it's open to anyone, Homa or Sia or Amani or Janet or Maia.
When I talk about, or when I think about connecting with people, it starts really early on in our news meetings. Sometimes we are in a room where we don't all have shared experiences. And I liken it to when you look at your Facebook feed, it's things that you like, it's your interests. So it's tailored to you, but when you're in a news meeting, you have a variety of people. So connecting with the community means actually listening to the people around you with different experiences and allowing kind of room for that to be included in your coverage. I may think that something is important because I see that there's a community that's underrepresented or their voice hasn't been shared as much. So I think that that's really where it comes down to, is that communication with your, your job, your work, understanding that there's a vast majority of stories that have not been told. So we should kind of, listen more and experience those, and I don't know, give people a chance to understand what's happening behind the scenes.
Mhm. Thank you. Is there anyone else to add to that?
Our goal, I think, as journalists has always been to give voice to the voiceless. And when you think about minorities or low income or women, those are often even more voiceless than anybody else. So to speak up for them, but I think we should all be better about this in a newsroom, where it shouldn't be the Black reporter covering everything in the Black community, or the Muslim reporter covering anything that happens in a mosque. So just being able to diversify, no matter what your background is, whether you're a woman of color, minority, white, male, just being able to get out of your box and go out into those communities and connect that way.
Absolutely. And do you see room for infrastructure changes within the overall new and media that can help support that notion?
Absolutely.
Advance that?
I think we talked about this earlier, but diverse hiring starts with diverse managers and having, thoughtful conversations about it, and not just saying, oh, we need to fill a minority in this spot, we need to fill a minority in this spot, we're looking a little too XYZ. So to have those conversations, we have committees, in place at our company. We do research, we go into people's homes and say, watch a newscast, tell us what you think. Is this fair and balanced? Does this look representative of the community that you live in, that when you turn on the 5 o'clock news? Do you feel comfortable watching that? And in the past, the answer was, no, you're making my community look worse than it is. You are not representing us correctly. And so once you have the research and the data behind what you're doing, you can take steps to say, okay, we weren't doing that correctly. Now how do we address it? How do we reach those communities that are underserved, underrepresented, and do it in a really thoughtful way instead of just checking off your diversity list?
Absolutely. Any other thoughts? I definitely think, the notion of checking the box is over, right? And a lot of people can see through the authenticity of recruiting pipeline, development, and overall diversity and inclusion efforts. So love the idea of being thoughtful and intentional about who you're bringing in, and also what type of environment you're creating to retain those employees within your organization as well, so that you create a culture of belonging. So I'm all for that for sure. So let's switch gears a little bit. We know the elephant in the room, if you will, is the election coming up, and would love to get some thoughts around the election and how it's impacting your ability to report the news, or maybe it's not. So we'd love to open that up to anyone on the panel who'd like to start. Janet, would you like to start with this question?
One of the things being an immigrant journalist is that we're more attuned to issues that affect the communities that we are not only cover but are participants in. I think that a lot of times things occur to us because we see them in our lives that may not occur to others in our newsrooms. When I was writing for the Plain Dealer, I wrote a lot about people for whom English was not their first language, or different ethnicities who didn't always see themselves represented in our newspapers. And I think that the media, especially, we absolutely need to be more reflective of the changing demographics of the country. And right now, issues like immigration and diversity and inclusion and racial justice are so much a part of the national conversation that we need to be able to cover the breadth of what people are talking about as we head into the election.
Thank you. But Maya, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, just sort of on a different note, I think just the past 4 years, or almost 4 years now, sort of trying to make sure your reporting can be heard over the sound of maybe the chant of fake news, which is something a lot of us have to deal with, no matter whether we're, reporting on something that you might think is more mundane versus something that could be maybe more of a complex, more in-depth story. I think now it's just more difficult to be heard over that chant, no matter what you're talking about. Everything you say to some is not believed anymore in the way that it was a few years ago.
And how do you overcome that? I could imagine it very challenging, when you're coming up against that on a daily, weekly basis. Are there any best practices or next practices for that matter that you would like to see to overcome those challenges?
I mean, for me, I just keep telling the story, whatever the story is. I don't know that there's a way to necessarily dial that rhetoric back now that it's started. But I think the best thing we can do is just make sure that our reporting is accurate and make sure that we keep telling the stories of people who aren't having their stories told.
Yeah, I love the, I don't remember who said it, giving the voice to the voiceless. I think that's really important, important part of that narrative as well. So let's go into our next question, ladies. What are any changes you've seen in the last 5 to 10 years on reporting racial equity and advocacy?
I think one of the challenges is that we, when you're in journalism school, when you start your first job, when you're growing up and you want to be a reporter, it is pounded into your brain, objective, objective, objective. You have to be objective. You can't show any bias. And I get that might be the key. You can't show any bias, but we all are born with biases. Our skin color is a natural bias. Where we're from is a natural bias. The sports team we root for is a natural bias. So you have those, they're inherent. And then I think the challenge becomes, especially in this environment, is how objective can I stay while being on the right side of history, while being true to myself, while being true to what is morally, ethically right? Or do I just put my head down and say, I'm going to present both sides, even if both sides aren't right? I think that becomes a real challenge for us. And I mean, I can't wait to look back in 10, 20 years and see how we did. But it's frightening because you want to do right, but you also, like Maya said, you don't want to hear those chants of fake news from either side. You don't want to hear it from anybody. You want to seem like you are objective, but you want to also do the right thing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you.
I just want to add on to that's why I think it's so important for us in our reporting to be very transparent. Like when we do have a quote that is used, we should be fact checking. We should be giving our viewers a chance to understand the reporting process. Sometimes we just became immune to it. This is what we do. We tell stories, but maybe we should go a little more in depth in how we were able to grab these, this information and where we got this and why you're not hearing this side. Maybe somebody didn't respond to you or didn't want to respond to you. So I think transparency is super important because it allows the reader or the viewer to understand that, okay, it may not show both sides, but here's why, or here's where we were able to identify fact versus fiction.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And Sia, I saw you kind of jumping. Would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I think that it's so difficult now because of this 24-hour news cycle that never stops. You never get a chance to breathe. You know, it's coming at you from everywhere. You just never really get a chance to turn off. I was part of a discussion last month with Shaker Heights native Wesley Lowry, and we talked about how, you know, now there's just so much, you know, there's, you know, after the show, there's behind the scenes, there's the show, you know, then go to social media for your thoughts. And then, you know, back in the day, you would have like a Sunday roundup where you put all those ideas together and you could, you know, review and discuss. And now it's so hard to even do that. There's no time for it. So you really don't get a chance to reflect. And so you wonder about the record we're setting if we're, you know, we're just go. So, you know, so much, you know, and then that's the task we're faced with. So you have to get it right the first time, because there might not be an opportunity to go back to fix. And so that in itself is very concerning. So it's just very challenging. We're in a challenging time here in journalism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And you raise a good point, Sia. I mean, I'm curious to hear from you and the other panelists regarding how do you create the space for yourself, right? We're talking about, you know, always being on, and it's important to make sure that each of you and all of us have an opportunity to reflect and unpack, you know, some of the news cycles, if you will. Would any of you mind sharing like how you know, decompress and create that space, that mental headspace for you, an emotional headspace to continue to be excellent and accomplished journalists each and every day?
I think we are constantly telling people to unplug. Like, I've read countless stories on the news, especially during the pandemic, of telling people the best way to, you know, save your mental health is to unplug. We never follow. I mean, I never follow that advice because then you feel like you're getting behind. You know, now I got to catch up. Now that's, you know, it's almost impossible to unplug and say, okay, you know what, I'm not going to read the news. Well, now when you go back to work in 2 days, you feel like information overload. What did I miss? So I wish we were better about that. I wish there was a way to just like delete the Twitter app off my phone and unplug. But if anybody has any advice on that, I'm here to listen.
I was just going to say that I do disconnect. Like, I have to. Like, there are points in my day where I will make sure that I don't pick up my phone. My husband is like not in social media. He's like against everything. He hardly picks up his phone. He always like turns it upside down. I was never that way. I'm always on my phone. But I've learned to like really just take maybe an hour or two. I know I might miss something maybe, but I've learned to accept that because we lived in a society before where we didn't have information at our fingertips 24/7. So I think we should, you know, embrace those moments that we have some space. It's hard. I don't know what to say, but just try maybe.
I would say, like, during the pandemic, one way that I've been unplugging is just by getting outside. And, you know, I still bring my phone with me, but just getting outdoors, smelling fresh air, walking my dog, just decompressing. So that works for me. Also the Pinterest app. I don't know why, but looking at interior design makes me happy. And so that's me to sort of wind down at the end of the day.
Yes, fresh air, animals. All good.
Well, and it's funny that they, you know, we'll hear, I don't know if you guys hear this, but I hear it so much of journalists these days are so, they overshare. You know, they're not like the Tom Brokaws and the Peter Jennings of years past. We're never going to be like that. I mean, journalists of today are never going to be like that because of just the environment that we're raised in and the tools that we have access to. Would Tom Brokaw have been Instagramming his vacation? I don't know, but you know, he didn't have the opportunity. So it's, you know, we're almost looked at as, especially if you're a young female journalist, you're looked at not serious enough if you you know, have a little too much fun on your social media, which on one side, you know, managers are telling you to be open and to share. And on the other side, you know, people are judging you for that. So there's a lot of back and forth on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, the oversharing also lends itself to being able to connect with your audience, right? And I think, you know, for all of you, that's certainly been an important part of your, you know, of your reporting. So, you know, I think there are certainly benefits to oversharing, if you will, right? Creating those connection points, you know, with your audience, I think is, you know, it's a win-win. So thank you so much for sharing. That, you know, that was a little out of the box. We just wanted to touch on that a little bit. I think, you know, mental health is really important. So I wanted to share that with the participants as well. So let's go ahead and go into our next question. What are some of the biases? We talked a little bit earlier about biases, and, you know, wanted to unpack what are some of the biases people believe the reporters have while reporting on the news. Would anyone like to take that, Homa, maybe?
Yeah, you know, we have this reporter Facebook group that a lot of us, you know, are always looking at, and we share advice, we share issues, we share stories. And one of the things that came up a few weeks ago was somebody saying, I'm noticing that more journalists are making their personal biases more public. And some of the comments in that thread were, you know, I went to this guy's funeral. He was a, you know, journalist for 40 years. He was so well respected. And people at his funeral were saying, gosh, I wouldn't know who that guy voted for. He was that objective. He was that like straight and narrow that you could not tell, you know, where his biases lie. Mm-hmm. And then you saw comments in this thread saying, yeah, you're talking about a lot of white male journalists. When we come in and our skin color and, you know, my immigrant background and my religion become known, people automatically attach a bias. So if I am talking about a story related to immigration, people sometimes will automatically think, well, you already have that bias. It doesn't matter what I'm saying, but you just come attached with that because I'm naturally, you know, have this background. So how do you overcome that? I mean, I know we try day in, day out, all of us, to be as objective as possible, but how do you explain to your viewers? And how do you make that clear with just, you know, your background?
Yeah, I can definitely see how challenging that can be in finding that balance as you're reporting. Would anyone else like to share their experiences? Good. Okay. All right, so we'll move on to our next question. And well, we'll go to the next question, and then we'll come back to this in a little bit. How has your vantage point given you the ability to see beyond the traditional people you've been covered? And how does it make you more inclusive in coverage in the greater Cleveland community? And this one, I would love for Janet to start with.
I think that Northeast Ohio is a very diverse community. And, you know, covering communities is not just about being diverse and inclusive, it's also about being accurate about what our community looks like. To the previous point about biases, I think each of us come in with different perspectives of the communities that we come from. And so when I'm talking to a small business owner who may have experienced some xenophobia related to the coronavirus and coming initially from some countries in Asia, they might be more likely to talk to me versus a white male reporter who's not an immigrant. So it's, being able to get stories, a wider range of stories because of the backgrounds and because the conversations we're able to have, because of the things that we pay attention to. One of the things I tell students when I visit schools is that, people who say that they get all of their news from social media. Well, your social media is kind of curated to the kinds of things that you already Facebook account knows, not to show me anything about the Golden State Warriors, because they know that I'm not going to like those kinds of posts. And so if I'm just seeing everything Cavs, then that's fine as a sports fan, but think about how that would color my perspective of the world if I were only seeing things that agreed completely with my outlook on the world. And I think that's one of the challenges that we have as journalists, to expose people to stories and perspectives and points of view that they might not encounter in their slice of life. And to, that's kind of the beauty of Cleveland, that there's so many different points of view and backgrounds and perspectives that I think makes for a richer coverage of the news.
Yeah, absolutely. When I talk with people specifically around diversity, equity, inclusion, I give a similar example and use, LinkedIn. There are a lot of opportunities to expand your network, both, obviously personally and professionally. And it's now is the time to really do your checks and balances to see who you are connected with. And as you pointed out, the creation of content is usually, dictated by what you like and what you view and what you listen to. So really being thoughtful and intentional about who you're connected with and making sure that you're expanding your scope to learn about, new information and connect with people that might not look like you or might not share the same views. And I think that starts at a very young age, right? When we're talking about the next generation of journalists or the next generation of professionals, to be able to instill that in them and open their eyes and minds up to that way of thinking as well. So thank you for sharing. Would anyone else like to comment or share their experiences or perspectives around that question?
I think when I was a younger journalist, I wasn't as vocal. Because I was always afraid I'd lose my job or there'd be some retaliation. And I mean, most of us still fear retaliation sometimes, but I'm in a place where I'm okay with being vocal about it. And, and when we don't do a good job in representing Northeast Ohio and the communities that we're in, and I'm speaking specifically about Northeast Ohio, I call it out. And the good thing is, I'm not the only one now in my newsroom that calls it out. There are other people who stand with me, people who don't look like me, and I think that's progress. I think that's progress. And we're to a point now where, why are we still having these conversations in 2020? Why is it, someone went out and only interviewed, 20-something-year-old, blonde hair, blue-eyed people for their opinion, on a story? Why didn't you go, over here and ask this person what they thought? Why didn't you interview a subject, that looked like someone else? Why didn't you do that? Why isn't your thought process like that? And so there's a way to do it without, offending. You can teach, and I think all of us can be taught to do, because not all of us are always right. There's always room for improvement. But that is one good thing that I feel pretty proud about, is being able to vocalize that now without really caring what's going to happen. To be honest with you, you get to that point where you're just like, oh well.
Yeah, oh, definitely. And I think the wiser you get, right, and the seasoned you become in your career, that lends itself to a certain level of confidence. I think that was brought up earlier, to be able to speak up, which is really important as part of this work, and more broader. One thing I just wanted to, I jotted down as you were speaking, Sia, was around, it triggered a thought around active allyship, right? You talked a little bit about, you didn't use those words, but it triggered something. What do you think are some of the ways that allies can help support this movement, if you will, and what are some of the ways that they can help support?
I always tell allies, I said, speak up when I'm not here.
Mm.
I mean, it's great, don't come to me after the meeting and whisper, oh, that was great. You said that. If I'm not there, who's going to speak up?
Mm-hmm.
The onus should not just be on me, it should be on everyone. And that is what I always tell allies. I'm like, speak up when I'm not here.
Mm.
I should not be the only one offended. Other people should be offended. You should be offended. Like, speak up.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that's the number one way.
Mm-hmm.
I also think too, like in the morning, sort of what Homa was saying earlier, not always having the burden be on the minority to tell the minority story, and have other people raise their hands to tell those stories too, and be just as excited to tell those stories as they would a different story. So that's not always on us to say, okay, I'll go to the mosque, I'll do this, I'll do that. And always having, to have that burden of, I will tell these diverse stories because other people in my newsroom don't want to. I think we get to real diversity of thought when everybody wants to raise their hand to go to those places and tell those stories without being forced necessarily.
And that takes, when you're out of your comfort zone, when you're covering a community that you're not part of, you're uncomfortable, right? I think people need to realize that we are uncomfortable a lot of the times in a lot of the communities that we cover, but it's not even a thought. It's not a thought for anybody to, send me to a fair to cover a Confederate flag drama. Nobody thinks about, she's going to be uncomfortable there. So I don't know why we think the other way of like, let's get everybody into every community. Let's get everybody to tell every story and just raise more awareness about it. Because sometimes it's just ignorance. They don't know any better. No, people don't know better. So just to raise that awareness.
Something as simple as, even when we began, like we all kind of pronounced our names to make sure that everybody could say it properly. It's important. And it's important in journalism as well when we're talking about the news, or maybe somebody's name sounds a little different. It's nice when people reach out and want to make sure that they're representing that community well, or put some thought into their stories. It makes a community feel as one. And that's where the thoughtfulness comes in, the importance of making sure that your community is thriving and understands different perspectives.
Absolutely. Yeah. And at the end of the day, I mean, everyone wants to be seen, everyone wants to be heard, right? So to underpin what each of your experiences, being able to take that time, right, to listen and learn about the communities at which you're covering is so important. And obviously all of you are doing it very well, given your accomplishments in the field. So we talked a little bit earlier about advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion, and through the lens of building a solid talent pipeline. I'm curious to learn how each of your organizations are thinking about building the next generation of journalists, and if maybe your organization isn't, what are some of your ideas around how to build a more diverse and inclusive workplace?
I think we started a couple of years ago with some very heavy diversity training. And at first, everyone rolled their eyes and said, what are we doing? And we had a week of really intense training. And it was eye-opening. It was eye-opening for the minorities. It was eye-opening for our fully white male photography staff. It was eye-opening for our producers to just raise awareness about what we are doing and what we're not doing, and what we can do and why we should do all of that. And just to have the conversation, because, you know, initially for myself going into it, I already thought, well, what are we doing? You know, this is just paying lip service. But after that, I saw some real changes happening in people's minds, just opening more and being, you know, we call it MOS, man on the street. Sometimes you stand there with a microphone and you wait for people to talk to you about whatever topic it is. And, you know, one of the photographers said, I noticed that some of the reporters here, and now that I'm thinking about it, those reporters are all people of color. They always stand there and they wait until they get a wide variety of thoughts, not just the first 3 people that show up. They say, oh, I need a woman now, or, oh, I need somebody older, or let me get a person of color. And I thought, yeah, I always do that because I didn't really think too much about it. I just thought that was equal representation. And they said, no, not everybody does that. Not everybody does that. Or I brought up, you know, during this diversity training, when I call one of our local universities for an expert, I'll specify sometimes what kind of expert I'm looking for. I want somebody younger. I want somebody older. I want somebody, you know, Latino. I want somebody Black. Like, what will make this story be more fleshed out? And they never bat an eye. They always deliver. And when people in the newsroom heard that, they said, wait, we can do that? We can ask for a not, you know, middle-aged white male expert? And it was just, you know, it's just raising awareness about those little things and saying, we can be better. We can do better. Our A block of our, you know, the first 10 minutes of our newscast doesn't have to be crime on the east side of Cleveland every time. You know, we can be better about that. So, and that happens when you not just have diversity in your on-air talent, but behind the scenes, which is probably more important because we're vocal. We're used to talking. Yeah. We're used to saying what we want to do and what we're going to do. But the people that are actually making the decisions, there needs to be a lot of diversity there as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. Sia, you're shaking your head.
Because she knocked it out the park. Homa knocked it out the park. It's true. I always tell people, I think people, and you know, I love being on air. I love being a reporter, but I'm like, man, I'm just a reporter. You know, I can pitch ideas and pitch stories and stuff, but at the end of the day, I'm not in management. I'm going to be assigned something. And I said, I've been telling, you know, because I mentor quite a few younger journalists, and I tell them, like, listen, if you want some power, you need to go into management. You need to be a producer. You need to be, you know, an assignment editor, assignment manager, managing editor. And it's like, that's the route. Like, you get to call the shots. You get to make these decisions. And it's so true. There are not enough people of color or women at the table to have these discussions. And it is disturbing. It is so disturbing sometimes when you think about some of these newsrooms and the meetings that are had. It's the same people assigning the assignments and the coverage, and they don't look like me and you. They don't. That's just the honest to God. And that's not just here in Cleveland. That's all over the country. It's all over the country. And so it's nice that we are aware of it and we're making better efforts, but there's still a lot of room to grow.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's actually a great segue into our next question. It might be our last question before we wrap up. And time is flying. At least for me, this has been a wonderful conversation so far. So I was curious, as a woman of color and immigrant journalist, you know, how do you show up, and what are some of the different, you know, or the varying expectations that you have to, you know, set for yourself or overcome in doing this work each and every day? Anyone like to start? Amani? No,
No, you're fine. You know, I don't know if there's necessarily a challenge that I have to overcome right now. I think it happened in the past where I didn't say I was Muslim, or I didn't say that I had, parents who were raised in Palestine. Like it's that bias, right? You're scared about how you're going to be perceived or how the stories you tell are going to be interpreted. And it was scary in the beginning. I think I overcame that challenge as soon as I was in news talk radio, and a comment was made by a caller saying that Muslims are crazy and, they're all crazy. I mean, he was very general about it. And I got off the air doing my newscast and I just thought, gosh, I wish he knew. I wish he knew that I was Muslim, because I feel like he might have a different interpretation of his community and have a deeper understanding of the people around him. And so I overcame that challenge by understanding that I feel like there was something powerful into being able to say what your background is or who you are as an individual, and give me questions, like if you're curious. So it all stems from, open communication. That's how we can better ourselves, and really just listening to one another. So those are always going to be challenges, but we can always strengthen them.
And I think you totally hit the nail on the head when you said they happened in the past. Like, we've all been doing this long enough to where we've built the confidence, and we have very thick skin at this point. But yeah, if you think back to your first, second job, coming out of college, even college, the first thing I heard was, Homa, you're gonna have to change your name. You're gonna have to change your name. That name, that's not gonna work. That's not gonna work anywhere. And this was 15 years ago, and saying, just that little thing, you're gonna have to change your name. And then wearing your skin like it's a liability. How do I apply for this job? How do I get my foot in the door and not give away too much about myself to turn them off? I think times are changing now. I think, you have diversity and inclusion committees at major companies, and it is thoughtful and it is intentional, and we're not just filling your minority box anymore, I hope, so that we can be a little bit more open and more free, and, just kind of own who we are now, be more comfortable in our own skin.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I definitely think we're moving in the right direction, and opportunity to continue to create safe and brave spaces like this one, and other spaces within each of your organizations will only help it advance, DE&I, and create a culture of belonging where people feel like they can bring their full selves. And more importantly, for the next generation of journalists to be able to see people that look like them. Right? Like sometimes, when you're looking into a specific field, or maybe you're, in the early days of your career, it's hard to be what you can't see, right? So I think, the more that we can, create these spaces, have the conversations, and be comfortable being, bold and intentional about this work, is going to continue to move us forward for sure. So I would love to wrap up with any final thoughts specific to your experiences as a journalist to the next generation of journalists that are coming through. Are there any quotes or perspectives that each of you would like to share before we close out?
I think a lot of people, when they see journalists like us, they may see other, and they may other us, but I think by us just showing up every day, telling the stories that we tell, and being that face in the community that people don't see other, they just they see themselves in us. And so I hope that by us being active in our communities and being on TV, for the next generation, when they see someone like us, it's not so, what is that? Who are they? They look exotic. You know what I mean? It's just, oh, that's a reporter, or, that's just a person. And so hopefully we'll get to that point by having more diverse faces and voices in the newsroom.
Thank you, Maya.
Well, I think things are changing and for the better. Like Homa said, we've all been doing this for a long time. And I mean, I remember having the same conversations 20 years ago about changing my name, that no one would be able to pronounce it. People would be like, oh, it's too ethnic. And now I see other West African um, reporters with names that have more consonants than mine, that are just like, and I love it. I love to see it. I'm like, oh, this is so awesome. Like, natural hair, glasses, all colors, all sizes. And so things are really, things are changing and for the better. And, my advice to younger journalists is to not feel like you have to change yourself, be authentic, be your true self, because people know and can tell who a fraud is. You can tell when you're uncomfortable. I look back at some of my my videos and my stories from my younger days, where I was trying to fit in this box. That's what they told me I needed to do to survive and to succeed. And I look at that person sometimes and I'm like, oh man, versus who I am now, unapologetic about it, unapologetic, and just, this is who I am. If you don't like it, bye. And so that's my advice to younger journalists. Use your uniqueness and your voice. No one has that but you. Use that to do good and to make people understand. My thing is normalize these differences, because there are so many people out there that have something in common with you, so normalize it.
And I think younger journalists will look at people like you and feel the confidence. You know what I mean? Like, we didn't have anybody to look up to. I had no one to look up to that looked like me or had my background. And so we were carving our own path, and I didn't have the confidence, at that age. And so hopefully I think people will look at each of us and say, well, she's doing it well.
Absolutely. Thank you, Homa. Janet?
I think any of us who grew up with mothers who told us that we needed to work twice as hard to get, all of us, I think, just on this panel, I'm so proud to be among such a diverse group of journalists. And I know that, applause to all of you for the hard work that you're all doing. I think that for those who are watching, aspiring journalists or young journalists who are young in their careers, I say that there is room, there is appreciation greater than before for the kinds of perspectives that you bring and the kinds of expertise that you have or that you hope to gain. I would encourage those who have aspirations to continue to pursue it, be unapologetically authentic and accurate, and there is room for you in our profession, and we as readers definitely need you to join us.
Thank you, Janet. Amani?
My mom used to say that I used to ask a lot of questions when I was younger, probably why I'm a journalist now. That would be my biggest piece of advice, is to ask questions. If you don't know something, if you're curious about something, don't be afraid to ask. And, if somebody looks like me, that's great, but there's also other people that don't look like me or don't look like Homa, or, we're all different people. So understanding each other more is definitely going to, set you apart from the rest.
Thank you, Amani. Well, this has been a wonderful, 54 minutes. We certainly covered a lot of information in a relatively short amount of time. I really want to extend my appreciation and gratitude to each of you, Maya, Homa, Janet, Sia, Amani. I could not have done this without you, and truly appreciate the time and commitment that each of you have taken today to share your experiences and your personal and career journey with me, and also with the participants. So thank you all again. Really appreciate it, and looking forward to the next time. Okay, so I'm going to bring on Megan to close us out.
Great. All right. Well, thank you, Elise, Amani, Homa, Maya, Janet, and Sia for joining us today. And thank you for sharing your insights with us. I would like to take a moment now to remind our audience to please make sure you fill out the US Census. Everyone counts. And thank you again to each of our Welcoming Week sponsors, the Platinum sponsors, the Cleveland Cavaliers, Marcus Thomas, United Church of Christ, the Gold sponsors, Bank of America, Dealer Tire, Cantonese Classic Seafood, the Silver sponsors, Alexander Mann Solutions, Cleveland Metropolitan Bar Association, Eli's Landscaping, Medical Mutual, the NRP Group, and the Bronze sponsors, the City of Cleveland, Cuyahoga County, City Visitors Guide, Dave's Markets, Destination Cleveland, Downtown Cleveland Alliance, Legal Aid Society of Cleveland, Margaret Wong and Associates, WKYC Studios. And please join us for our Welcoming Week events, including cooking demonstrations, more panel discussions, and a special Irish musical group this evening. You can register for all of these events at Global Cleveland's website, globalcleveland.org. And thank you for joining us this morning. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.